Hello and welcome to Couture Coupling, the commentary. I'm Dr. Aurit.
And this is Paul.
And today we're going to be talking about a Japanese Netflix show called The Boyfriend. And for some context, there was a show that we both loved watching called Terrace House. And the premise was mostly in Japan. They had a couple of seasons in Hawaii. But that basically there was a house where at any point in time, 3 men and 3 women live in this house, and they're videotaped, and they work, and they have adventures, and they date, and they support each other with their work goals. It's very Japanese. And people can leave when they want to. And it's different than American reality shows where people are kicked off when somebody reaches their goal and they're like, okay, I'm done, or they don't have any more dating options, or they have enough fame or whatever.
I mean, it's different from contemporary reality TV shows, but it had a lot in common with, I know you haven't seen this, but MTV's The Real World, but, very in a Japanese culture way.
And Paul introduced me to this show, and what made it really fun is that they had a panel of 3 men and 3 women of different ages representing different aesthetics and different vibes. And at the beginning, middle, and end, they're watching the show, and then you see them comment on the show.
Yeah, that was what made it really exceptional to me.
And given how much we love commentary,
meta
commentary, we're commenting on the commenting on the commenting, and then throughout all the years of it, the panelists were continual. So that's like you're anchored in those personalities.
Judges is a funny word because it's not wrong, but it's also wrong.
Yeah.
Like they are doing judging.
They are, they can also norm you to Japanese standards. There have been a few times where our take was completely opposite of them. And it's also really fun when some of the panelists would play out, imagine if these 2 people went on a date and this is the conversation. So one of the things that makes this complicated is that there were some controversies around the show and a couple of really sad losses. They had a cast member ultimately die by suicide, and after being bullied online by the Japanese public, which was just really awful. This person, Hana, was just a lovely, energetic, sweet person. And after that, the show did not come back, which was quite understandable, especially given Japan's problem with suicide.
I mean, it took a lot less for that to wind up torpedoing the production than Love Island, which has survived 3 suicides,
including the suicide of a host. Yeah. And I don't know, it's hard to say with online shows how many people would have done this anyway versus how much of this is a response to the public just being cruel. And I really have a hard time understanding online cruelty. Like, how miserable and loathing must you be filled? Like, how much self-loathing must you have? How much anger to take it out on another person like that? All that being said, Terrace House ran for a lot of years. I don't know how it's perceived now in Japan. But
there was legislation specifically in response to the final season that ended in that suicide. So, at least for some people in Japan, pretty negatively.
Do you know what the legislation was? Was it?
I think it was something about like cyberbullying.
Yeah, which needs to happen. They were, and the show was always interesting to me because it wasn't just romance and people had other kinds of goals. It was interesting to see them help each other. There was one person who came on with a romantic partner, and he ended up being very popular.
Who wasn't on the show. They were in he had a pre-existing romantic relationship.
And he came on for work goals and sort of mentored everybody else.
His girlfriend didn't join him on the show, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and But there have also been a lot of, scandals in terms of people hooking up off camera or in secret, but then lying about it, but for reasons that are understandable given their brand image, all of that. Anyway, this is a very long backstory into Terrace House. And now the boyfriend is kind of like gay Terrace House, which, if you know anything about Japanese culture, it's kind of shocking and amazing that they're finally putting this. I'm assuming it's also airing. It must be airing in Japan. It's all in Japanese.
Airing in Japan.
And because while watching Terrace House, there were so many times where I was like, this person is clearly not straight, and it makes me sad that they have to pretend to have chemistry with people. And in one of the last seasons, there was somebody who came out as bi and wanting to question, and that was very exciting. So I find it encouraging and promising and really cool to see the culture take this step forward in making space for young gay men to date each other and to be seen in a very mainstream sort of way. And so we've watched about 3.5 episodes so far, and I'm going to give a few spoilers. So we are about 3.5 episodes in, and so far they bring in guys. There are about 6 or 7 of them, and they have a kind of cute setup where it's not just for dating, because it's in Japan. They're going to be industrious, and they all have to learn how to make coffee, and they're going to create a mobile cafe.
Staff a mobile cafe.
Yes. They had to name it, and draw a picture for the menu, and they were taught how to make coffee. Other people gave them the beans and all of that and did the rest of it. And what they do is, after everyone's trained, each guy gets to say, okay, you're in charge today. Who do you want to work with you? Which is a kind of not so subtle way to let anyone you have a crush on or interested in dating, you get to work together. It's kind of close.
Very small space.
My first thought was there's going to be a lot of butts touching each other.
Thanks, Tina.
Yes, Bob's Burgers, upper butt in the last episode, UB. Anyways, so they're doing work in the cafe, and they're talking, and then afterwards they have sort of date-like conversations. And I don't know if this is actually representative of dating in Japan, but there definitely seems to be a lot more explicit, I am actually interested in you stage of a relationship.
Oh, the declaration, like the declaration of your feelings.
The confession.
Confessing your feelings is an important milestone in a Japanese relationship.
So a lot of times the way that I would interpret it, if this was an American cast, would be, oh yes, they're both interested in each other. They are their facial expressions are quite enthusiastic, and they're nodding, and it doesn't actually indicate if they're interested or not. I mean, this is in line with what I have learned and spoken to people who have done business in Japan, where American standards for agreement, you're going to get a lot of verbal affirmation, which is not the same thing as I endorse or agree to what you are saying. So it's interesting to watch, and they're talking about their different backgrounds. And one of the guys, Shun, who is absolutely beautiful. He's a model. He looks like this melancholy anime character.
Great skin.
His hair is he's just beautiful. And a lot of the guys like him. And, Paul's comment on him is that he's functionally a cat.
Totally.
He's, a lot of times things will be happening and he's just like
asleep or covering himself with a blanket
or totally staring off into the distance. And after a while, I started to notice, wait a minute, he's dissociating. And the reason I wanted to talk about this episode, and I think I've talked about this a bit before, but I see it as a big hole in reality TV where this happens and people don't know how to name it as complex trauma.
What's this that happens?
When a person is having complex trauma reaction in the middle of a scene, and it breaks all of the social norms and the social scripts. And the panelists don't know how to interpret it. The other people don't know how to interpret it. And it's, I think, it's an opportunity for people to learn so that we don't misunderstand. Like
we correctly interpret what they're expressing.
Yeah, because it's actually intense distress, and it needs to be attuned to, and it needs to be treated gently.
So why don't you give some examples of what that can look like and how other people might interpret it wrongly?
Yeah. So Shun
or
is...
do you want to just jump to the specific example?
I'm going to jump to the specific example because it's an incredibly common one. So Shun and Dai are on a date. Dai has been quite extroverted, super socially savvy, and quite into Shun.
Sort of on a campaign to win Shun over.
Yeah. And, you know, he's clearly very, very social. And Shun has this distance from him, but from everybody, but also a sweetness and a very serious sort of flavor to him.
I feel like I know that we sort of get more context for it later, but I do feel like there's a narcissism to him too.
I would agree.
Or solipsism, maybe?
I think solipsism, actually, you're totally right. In the beginning, when he was talking about what he wants in a relationship, it had the vagueness of narcissism. But once we got his backstory, solipsism, I think you're right on with that. And, you know, he talked about wanting someone who is very pure-hearted. And
which translates to someone who doesn't take dick pics.
And so for context again, so I have to decide if that phrase is adult content for the next time when we upload this episode on Spotify. I don't know if it counts or not.
Who doesn't photograph eggplants?
And now we know where eggplants come from.
Yes, we do.
I think we named it in another
different
episode
reality show.
Anyways, what Paul is referring to with the eggplant naked photographs is he was playing with Dai was showing him something on the phone, and when he reached for it, Dai's, I'm assuming, Japanese Grindr came up, and he saw all these photos.
No. I think what happened was Dai was showing him a picture. He swiped the wrong way in Dai's gallery and got a bunch of naked photographs.
And Shun kind of had a freak out and was basically saying that in the past he dated somebody who was not a good person and had these profiles of naked pictures, and this set him into this trauma response of, is this a red flag? Are you going to be like my ex-boyfriend? And, you know, I don't know, again, what's it like in Japan? The panelists had my read. In America, it is quite common for gay men on Grindr to post nudes of themselves, body parts without faces. The no faces is hard for me to understand as someone who is very attracted to, the face I'm looking at right now. But I can't understand attraction without liking someone's face.
I mean, I think that's just evidence of, like, I want to say, like, almost, like, sex differences, not gender differences. Like, male and female pornography are just very different. And obviously there's a cultural component to that, but I do wonder what degree it's just biological.
Okay, that's a really interesting point. And I think there used to be a practical reason for this too, because people wanted to keep a certain level of anonymity. Mm-hmm. But it's not like this, you know, Dai's behavior is completely within the norm. And I could see someone saying, you know what, I want somebody who's more conservative, who has my sort of boundaries. Totally understandable.
It's going to be hard to find, though, especially for young men.
I think so. It doesn't mean you can't try to find it, but his response was just sort of terror and shutting down.
It wasn't just I don't like this, ew.
Right. He literally shifted how he was sitting on the couch and moved his whole body orientation, and his head went from being close to the guy to being on the opposite end. And he sort of pretended like he was asleep, or he was maybe falling asleep. And, you know, there are a subset of people who, when they have an adrenaline response.
So that's a freeze response, right?
And then they fall asleep. But it's more than a regular freeze. It's an actual, like, I'm falling asleep response to adrenaline. I wonder if that's a separate response from a freeze. So for some more context, maybe that's what we should be called at this show is
For some more context.
for some more context, because I always have context to give you. There's fight or flight, which is what we sort of hear when you have the adrenaline to, are you going to engage or are you going to run away? And we get taught that that's people's reactions. And then there is freeze or fawn. And freeze is when you literally like think the Jurassic Park, the T-Rex is coming to get you, but the T-Rex can't register motion. So if you don't move, maybe it won't see you or won't eat you or won't register you as a threat.
And that's a pretty widespread response in the animal kingdom. Bunnies will do it. Deer will do it. That's where playing dead comes from.
Oh, and deer in headlights.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I realized that it was, that makes so much sense. The same nervous system evolved from that. And then fawning is one that a patient taught me about from their another therapist they had worked with in the past, which has been life-changing as a concept for people, which is when you're trying to appease the scary person and make them like you and do things that ingratiate yourself, but it's not quite that manipulative. It's more like, please don't hurt me. I'm going to be really, really nice to you, and I'm going to cue that I'm going to be compliant and submissive to you.
Do you think that works in the context of the discussion we're having about trauma responses? Because fawning is a response to someone trying to invade or trespass your boundaries, and the trauma response is often just sort of like out of nowhere, right? Like Di wasn't showing him naked pics and he was like, I don't know what to do, help. It was an accident.
Yeah, but he still saw the boy he was interested naked before he was ready to, which
Right.
I think he experienced as invasive. And the information itself, because he said
Was
I didn't,
invasive.
and he
Yeah,
said
that's
I didn't
true.
want to see that. The information was invasive, and I think that people fawn, women especially fawn when, like, the number of times a woman has been on a date where the guy is being inappropriate,
Mm-hmm.
they fawn so that he doesn't get mad. So a lot of times fawning is a do not get mad and hurt me,
Right.
do not get mad and punish me kind of thing.
Preemptively.
Right. And I think for people of color in this country, fawning is a huge part of how do you manage white people's potential anger, power dynamics, all of that. And fawning becomes a very exhausting kind of way to cope. And a lot of times for me in therapy with patients, I will literally like, what does it look like if you don't fawn? And the confidence that people get when they stop fawning is pretty dramatic, because all of a sudden you're not having to convince somebody of why they should like you, and you're not convincing them why you're not a threat. Instead, you're actually acting on your desire or your feeling and saying what you want. So anyways, so I think the fawning response is definitely a complex trauma response because it means you learned the other was scary and going to punish you.
As opposed to a native response to terrifying stimuli. So like,
yes, but what's considered what's terrifying, that's actually a good distinction for us to be making. What's considered terrifying, complex trauma dictates and expands what's terrifying to you, because all of a sudden more things remind you of the scary thing, you know? And yeah, whereas that's why for a lot of people, that's why triggered became such a popular word, because it was the first time people were saying, actually, this thing for me brings up trauma. This thing that is innocuous to you is actually quite loaded and contentious for me. So they go this back and forth, and Shun ultimately in the show reveals his backstory, which to me was heartbreaking, which is that
I think to everyone it's heartbreaking.
Yes, to everyone it's heartbreaking. That basically he was abandoned as an infant, and he describes how he was literally left in a box and spent his entire adolescence from birth to the age of 18 in an orphanage.
That's more than just his adolescence.
Yeah, that's his whole entire his up until his adolescence. So his childhood, his whole entire existence in a place that was scary, where he clearly did not receive sustained affection, where he clearly was not witnessed, and where he clearly learned to try to make himself invisible and cover himself up and go into cat mode to survive.
I agree with you, but you're inferring that. Like, he did not go into any detail except to say that it was hard and it was not good.
Right. But the symptoms that people reveal when they're having a complex trauma response generally lets you know the reaction they had when the trauma started. And I think it was, given how beautiful he is, I'm also inferring it was quite difficult for him to be invisible. And I would bet money on that he has had people prey on him. He definitely alluded to having experienced bad things and has alluded to being chased by guys he doesn't reciprocate. And so then he ends up dating this guy who, was cruel to him, and he doesn't go into a lot of detail. He just talks about his high need to feel reassured and loved. Though given how unloved he was, I don't trust his capacity. I don't know that he actually does have a high need. I don't know that he knows that. He's, there's a skittishness to him and a calmness.
Part of what trauma does to you is it makes you unable to read your own emotions, not just other people's.
Oh my God, you're totally right. That is a very good way of putting it. I think, to be honest, since reading emotions is so natural to me, both myself and others, I'm sort of blind to
blindness.
Yeah. It makes, I have been aware of the ways in which complex trauma makes it hard to know your own internal cues.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the way you just said it was quite clear. Yeah. To know what your actual feelings, just to read your own feelings as things that need to be interpreted. So when they are, anyway, so Shun and Dai go on a date and
to an aquarium
that we think was also, that I think was also where Princess Jellyfish, this random anime show that was really cool, also about gender nonconforming people in Japan. There's a whole scene where she and her mom go to the aquarium and she's drawing jellyfish, and it looked like identical in scale and paneling and shape to that. So I maybe we'll look it up and see if we can figure it out. But they go on a date, and in a kind of, everyone has to write who they want to go on a date with, and the only people who get matched go on a date. And of the whole house, they're the only two that at this point like each other.
Write down each other's names.
And at the end of the date, the Dai, who is clearly more, he does have a little bit of a player kind of energy. He has a lot of friends. He has a lot of swagger.
He's a puppy.
He's a little more sophisticated than a puppy, I think. I think that he has game in a way that Shun does not. I think his mysteriousness is interpreted as game, but it's dissociation.
Yeah. Cat people.
So at the end of the date, Dai tells him, I know you have a hard time. Well, on the date, they talk about their interest and they put it to a ratio, and Shun said he would like it to be 50-50. And then Dai asks him about their ratio, and he says 8, and which means Dai 80-20. Dai is showing 80% of the interest, and Shun is showing 20%, which Dai sort of does this double take. It's like, okay, what's going on? But tries to be sort of positive about it. And then later on the date, when he asks him, Dai asks Shun, I'm clearly elated and excited to be here with you and to go out with you. And it would make me very happy if maybe at some point in the future, you can express how you felt about the date, or if you have any feelings towards me. And Dai gets quite enthusiastic and romantic and energized by his little request for feelings to be declared. And I think in a non-traumatic, even cis-het context, that level of this cool guy being that affirming would be considered such a great thing. In fact, the panel all think they're such a great couple. And all of a sudden, I see Shun's face disappear. He is dissociating. He is staring off into space. His face goes blank. he is sort of nodding but not paying attention to what he's nodding to. And I said to Paul, look, he's dissociating.
Well, he's hugging his knees at some point later
Well,
on.
that's the next step, right? What does he do? The more that Dai talks, he starts hugging his knees and rocking back and forth kind of slowly. And this is a trauma response, right? If somebody is staring off into space and they're not able to engage, they are flooded with their own internal memories, with their own internal history. And it's so overwhelming. It's like a flashback, right? You're not in the moment, you're somewhere in the past. And Dai in the beginning doesn't notice, but to his credit, he does notice. And he's like, what does this mean? What are you doing? And Shun almost tells him and then says nothing and doesn't talk about it. And the date ends. And cut to Shun saying, there was something that I saw on that date that made me not like him anymore. And the panel is stunned. They cut to the whole panel gasping and going, huh? What? Everyone is confused. I understand why everyone is confused. But as they're sort of describing the incident, and then you see the next morning, Shun, like a cat, is sleeping on the couch, and Dai is sort of half on the floor, half next to him, sort of trying to hug him, and Shun is non-responsive. And the panel...
Like a dead body, one of the panelists said.
Yes, and the panel are being descriptive about what's happening, but they're very confused, and they're laughing about it. But they're not laughing at Shun. They're laughing the kind of laughter that is when
incomprehension.
Incomprehension, exactly. This does not make sense. And I think sometimes that kind of laughter actually is a cue or a signal that you witnessed something trauma related. Because all of a sudden they're like, what is this? What's going on?
That's a good point, I think.
And I think that's when I was like, okay, actually, let's pause watching. And I want to talk about this because if people can start seeing these signs and understand it, then maybe Shun can get the space that he needs and let himself not, you kind of wait until the person has processed the flooding and you don't do anything invasive. And then you help put language to it. And I know I've talked about this quite a bit for the fact that this is only like our something like 8th episode. I've talked about this phenomenon. And I guess if in reality TV, there's going to be higher levels of trauma and we're watching this a lot, I want to point it out because it definitely gets in the way of couples. The other person has to be the verbal bridge because Shun was a child in that moment and children need adults to be able to say to them, this is what you're feeling. This is why you're feeling it. It is safe for you to feel these things. I will wait with you and I will help you make sense of it and we will still be connected and I will give you space. And then afterwards we can do something either soothing or fun or exciting. And when you haven't had that experience, all you know is how to be stuck, how to be trapped. It's an awful place to be trapped, right? Like imagine being trapped in the scariest parts of your childhood and you had you had secure attachment with your parents. You knew you were loved. It's still kind of a lot. And so I was just screaming at the TV, this is a complex trauma response, people. You need a psychologist to tell you what is it you're seeing and why he is freezing and why he is coping through immobilization. Now, we're going to go back to the episode and maybe we'll catch you up on it later in another future episode. So I'm curious to see how they actually plays out and what it was that made Shun decide no about Dai.
Yeah, that's the part that's missing for me is like, I think it is clear, even to me, that because, holding your knees and rocking back and forth, that Shun was having a trauma response. But it's not clear to me what triggered it. Like, is it the conversation they had afterwards? Did Shun get the ick and not know how to express it? I think it's a combination.
I think either Shun got the ick or got the red flag danger, danger. But as Dai was expressing so much enthusiasm and it wasn't balanced, Shun became overwhelmed. A lot of times for people, so when people fawn, they often become acutely aware of what the other person wants from them, especially people with complex sexual trauma. Again, no details are going to be, we're not going into any details to make this safe for people to listen to, but there's that I'm going to know what the other person wants of me more than I know what I want in the moment. And in the paralysis, you know what? The paralysis is I don't want to know what anyone wants at all. I don't want to know what I want. I don't want to know what they want. I want to know nothing in that moment. And die is when people are mysterious, it is very easy to completely project your fantasies onto them. I have come to see mysteriousness as an undifferentiated self. Do you want to explain what that means?
A self that hasn't formed into a discrete configuration, that doesn't have like clear boundaries and a settled shape.
And when you try to date and you have that unformedness, dating is actually pretty terrifying. You can feel annihilated or overcome. And because he's beautiful and because he's quiet and because he gay and sensitive and can play music and it seems pretty thoughtful so far, it's so easy to project what you want. And I'm guessing that Dai's enthusiasm is too great with how little he knows him. So my guess is that Shun is feeling Dai's projection. And it's not him, and he is not being known, and has no way to point to any of this. You know, Shun is 23. He's been on his own for 5 years. I just want to send him, I would say a giant hug, but he's a cat. So I would like to send him a very, very cozy blanket.
He could really use one.
Anyways, so I think that will be all for today. Just as a bit of a disclosure, Paul and I are feeling a little bit under the weather today, so our energy is a little bit low, but I really wanted to talk about this. I think you did
great. I was just not holding my end up.
You always hold your end up. You're literally holding my arm so I can hold the microphone. That is how much he is holding himself. But yeah, you're usually a more talkative and
I am more subdued.
Yeah, but you did not fully agree to do this right now. I mean, you agreed, but I was like, wait, no, I have things I want to say. And I thought it was going to be 5 minutes, but it's almost 35 minutes. So yay for that. So this has been Couture Coupling the Commentary. I'm Dr. Aurit.
And I'm Paul.
And we are fully ourselves.
And completely together.